Good out there. Well, there is so much focus on the United States at the moment. Smashed by drought, the cattle herd is at its lowest level since the 1950s. It's sending things like lean beef trimmings, key to burger meat, to record prices, driving huge demand for imports from countries like Australia. And now a bird flu outbreak. To unpack it all, we're joined by Rabobank's Angus Gidley-Baird and Lance Zimmerman, who's the senior analyst for North America. Lance, welcome down under. How are you finding it?
Thank you. Oh, it's been great. I love the weather. It's a warm fall here, which is welcome to the U.S., which is having a seasonally cool spring.
Good on you. Now, in terms of avian flu, let's start with that. Found in a dairy worker, the USDA since tested ground beef. That came back negative, thankfully. Has that spooked things, though?
No, it really hasn't. You know, as we look at what's going on right now, it's mostly been a virus that's been affecting the dairy cow population, not been found in any beef cattle. The virus is transmitting from milk-to-milk contact, and so it's very manageable from that standpoint. Improved biosecurity, improved sanitation measures, and just make sure that we're doing right as an industry to make sure that it's under control, isolated, and not affecting other areas of the animal protein space.
Meat is still safe to be
Yes.
confirm that, but are there concerns that consumers could turn away, that it could affect some of that domestic demand? We all know that when headlines hit, people can sometimes react a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think reasons for concerns are warranted as we think about potential demand pullback. But we also have to remember we have 2 years of this virus being prevalent in the poultry space. We didn't see a pullback in demand for eggs in the U.S. We didn't see a pullback for chicken or turkey, poultry meat. And so within the beef space, there's not a heightened concern right now from the consumer. They're confident in the beef supply. As you mentioned, the test came back negative of a very thorough ground beef test last week. And so overall, Americans are really queuing up for grilling season. May is beef month in America, and we're not going to miss out on that opportunity with Memorial Day at the end of the month being a huge grilling holiday for the country. And so it's all systems go as far as the U.S. beef industry is concerned.
Just quickly, what's your big grill?
Oh, definitely a strip loin. Yeah, we love strip steaks.
Good on you. Angus, I guess the challenge here is, though, what does all of this mean for Australia?
Well, we're all looking at the US in terms of it effectively sets global prices. The US beef consumer is the strongest in the world. It'll determine, what they're willing to pay for it. And with reduced supplies over there, we're seeing it as an opportunity, not only in terms of being able to send more product into that US market, but also into some of our key Asian markets like China, Japan, South Korea, where the US is also a big supplier. Their reduced production and reduced exports means it gives us a little bit of a competitive edge into that market too.
Yes, you've touched there on the US cattle herd. We've obviously seen a big drop in numbers. Lance, how is the season looking, and are we at the point in America of rebuilding yet?
Unfortunately, we're not. Again, everything happens almost in opposite step in the U.S. versus Australia. So as the U.S. has gone through 4 years of drought, by and large, Australia producers have been at the benefit of that with really great growing conditions. And so the challenge is, just when we thought we might get some relief in 2023 with a transition back to El Nino, it was kind of atypical. It ended up being a drier El Nino, and now we're transitioning back to La Nina again with our weather patterns here this summer and fall. So as we look at rebuilding, the prospects are still pretty doom and gloom, unfortunately, for those producers. While prices are higher, and they're certainly appreciative of that, the pasture conditions are pretty limiting in their opportunities to rebuild right now.
In terms of then, I guess, sentiment in the industry, you've just said doom and gloom. What is the feeling?
Yeah, very much so in the same place that I think a lot of your producers were at when I was here 10 years ago. They want to rebuild. They see an opportunity with higher prices, but pasture conditions just aren't letting them. And so when you think about the word sentiment, I think the word frustration comes across to a lot of producers right now. Prices have increased to make them whole again, but the physical opportunity of increasing the carrying capacity of their pastures is out of their control. And so they're waiting for that precipitation to come so they can lean into that rebuild and obviously be a net benefit to you all in Australia to feed more Australian beef right into that market.
There's been some rumblings around the Aussie feeder cattle market and whether we could actually start, Angus knows what's coming, live exporting to America. Is there a scenario where this could happen?
I think it's interesting because we do take in cattle from overseas, from Hawaii, into the U.S. as cattle, calves and feeder cattle in Hawaii into U.S. feed yards. So getting cattle on a plane or a long boat ride certainly isn't a challenge. It's a little bit different talking Hawaii to the U.S. though versus Australia to the U.S. And so I think doing that, the chief concern needs to be, one, what's the animal welfare ramifications? How do we take care of those animals? It's a 37-hour flight. I know, I just did it. So let's make sure we're taking care of those animals properly. And I think that's chief concern that we have to figure out logistically. Will the price spreads allow it? Will the fuel and transportation costs allow it? The market will work that part out. But I think the biggest thing is making sure we can accompany those animals, not create headaches for the buyers on the other end. Is it possible? Possibly. Is it going to happen in large numbers? I would be really challenged to see it happening in a way that would severely uplift the Australian market or help out those producers in volume in the US needing to fill a pipeline.
Angus, from your perspective, what conditions would have to be at play for that to be worth it?
Obviously, the financial position's got to work, the money side of things in terms of price in the US and the price in Australia. And I don't know, Lance, if you can remember what the feeder price off the top of your head at the moment is, but in Australia, if you say it's $3.50 here in Australian per kilo, you've obviously got to accommodate the cost of transport over there. But I think also you've got to look at the system. You know, the US feed industry is a massive industry. There are some big yards over there, and they're taking on large licks of cattle on a regular basis. So being able to put that many cattle on a boat and keep a regular supply up is one thing. Also fitting into the system in terms of you've got a very consistent animal product in the US compared to what we've got here from the north of the country to the south of the country. You know, you've got Bos Indicus content to a full Angus down south. To be able to get a boatload of cattle that meet the right specs that would fit into a US feeder system, I think is another thing to think about. So, like Lance, I mean, you don't say nothing's impossible, but I think it's probably something that maybe you'd have to be very narrow in what you're actually targeting, and I think that probably means, as Lance says, you sort of rule out the chance of it having a major impact on an Australian or a US market.
We did once live export via Mexico years ago, didn't we?
We may have,
I believe John Condon from Beef Central may have told me that we weren't allowed to go into the States, so then we shipped them in through Mexico until the States found out and that got knocked on the head.
Okay.
Possibly.
Wouldn't be the first thing to come from Mexico to America.
That's right.
What does the year look like from our perspective in Australia, Angus?
It's improving, I think, is the best way of describing it. I mean, last year, everyone knows what happened last year and where prices fell to. It was well below where we expected them to fall, and I think that was a confidence in the market situation, not necessarily seasonal conditions. I know, there were definitely dry places in the country at the time, but it really felt like the confidence disappeared out of the market. I think this year with the prospect of better seasonal conditions and what we're looking at from a demand point of view, the US market gradually improving, some of our Asian markets clearing their stocks and starting to take some higher numbers, we think by the end of the year it'll be better than what it has been at the start of the year. So a gradual increase, but it's not going to be something that suddenly overnight we see a huge increase in demand in those markets. So it's going to take a while, but it's going to marry up quite nicely with our increase in cattle numbers as they come on the market.
Lance, just quickly, has it been good to taste some nice steak?
Oh, this video travels, so no, beef's been great here.
But be careful, we might send you on a long flight.
Exactly. Yeah, if I don't behave, you'll send me back in the cargo hold. No, it's been fantastic. Last night's dinner. In the U.S., we have very standardized cuts. We're not as internationally focused in our markets as Australia is. So a cut like we had last night at the dinner was beef cheek. That's not something I can get every day in America retail store or get, as I butcher my own animal. And so I appreciate the wide variety of cuts and the wide variety of focus that your producers have here. In the U.S., we only export at most 12% of our beef production. Here it's 70%. And so that means an entirely different flair in talking to producers and experiencing beef cuts you may not every day in America.
Thank you so much for your time, Lance and Angus. Appreciate it. Well, guys, we're off to the break, but stay with us. More on the other side.